My name is Emily Harper and I'm 34 years old. Last month, my husband Daniel was killed in a car accident in Seattle, hit by a drunk driver while crossing the street to a job site. I was shaking, barely able to breathe when I called my parents, hoping for their comfort, but my mom's voice was clipped, distracted. "We're in the middle of Ava's big gala for her promotion," she said. "Can you handle this until tomorrow?" My 9-year-old daughter Chloe and I sat alone that night, clinging to Daniel's jacket, our world in pieces. If you've ever felt abandoned by family when you needed them most, please share where you're watching from in the comments, and hit subscribe to join others who get this pain. It's a story of betrayal, but also of finding strength in the ashes. Daniel was my everything. We met on a rainy September day at the University of Washington during a campus tour where my cheap umbrella snapped in the wind. He was this lanky architecture student, all smiles and messy hair, who jogged over with his own umbrella, holding it above me like some kind of hero. "Can't let you drown before you even enroll," he teased, his voice warm like the coffee we grabbed afterward. That was Daniel, always there, always steady. We spent hours that day talking about art, music, and dreams of building something lasting. By the time we said goodnight, I knew I'd found someone special. We were inseparable after that. Study sessions in the library turned into late-night walks along the Seattle waterfront, sharing fries at Ivar's and laughing over his terrible puns about classic rock songs. "Don't stop believing in us, Em," he'd say, butchering Journey lyrics with a grin. We ignored friends who said we were too young to get serious, marrying at 25 in a small ceremony at Gasworks Park with the city skyline sparkling behind us. Our apartment in Capitol Hill was tiny, but Daniel filled it with sketches of eco-friendly community centers he dreamed of designing. He'd pin them to our walls, calling them our future, one blueprint at a time. Daniel wasn't just a dreamer, he made things happen. After graduating, he landed a job at a local architecture firm, pouring his heart into projects that gave back to the community. He had this way of making clients feel like their ideas mattered, sketching their visions with a pencil that never seemed to leave his hand. At home, he was just as devoted. When we decided to start a family, we hit roadblocks that tested us. A miscarriage left us hollow, sitting in silence on our couch, holding hands until the sun came up. Doctor's appointments piled up, each one chipping away at our savings and hope. Daniel never wavered. He'd bring me tea, rub my shoulders, and say, "We'll get there, Em, together." When I got pregnant with Chloe, it felt like a miracle. The pregnancy was rough. I was on bed rest for the last 3 months, terrified we'd lose her. Daniel worked from home, sketching designs at our kitchen table while making me laugh with stories about his college days. He'd read architecture books to my belly, joking that Chloe would be born with a T-square in her hand. When she arrived, tiny and perfect, Daniel cried harder than I did, holding her like she was the most precious blueprint he'd ever drawn. For 9 years, we were a team. Daniel coached Chloe's art classes despite knowing nothing about painting, watching YouTube tutorials late at night to keep up. He'd sketch buildings with her, their heads bent together over paper, her giggles filling our home. Chloe was his mini-me with his hazel eyes and stubborn streak. He'd make her blueberry waffles shaped like houses, stacking them high with whipped cream. "Gotta build a strong foundation, kiddo," he'd say, winking. He never missed her school events, his calendar filled with color-coded reminders for her art fairs or parent-teacher meetings. Our life wasn't perfect. Money was tight and Daniel worked long hours, but it was ours, built on love and little moments. Like the time he surprised us with a picnic at Discovery Park, where Chloe ran through the grass and he whispered to me, "This is what I want forever." I thought we'd have forever too, but there were signs we missed. Small cracks in our foundation that I didn't see until it was too late. Those cracks in our foundation weren't obvious at first, buried under the rhythm of our daily life. Daniel was always pushing himself, staying up late to refine designs, skipping lunches to meet deadlines. I'd catch him rubbing his temples, blaming it on too much coffee or Seattle's endless gray skies. "Just need a good hike to clear my head," he'd say, promising we'd hit Rattlesnake Ledge for a weekend escape. But work kept piling up, and he kept putting it off. There was this one night, maybe a month before everything fell apart, when he came home looking drained, his usual spark dimmed. I asked if he was okay, and he brushed it off with a tired smile. Just a long day, Em. Nothing a little Zeppelin and a beer can't fix. I believed him because I wanted to. Looking back, I wish I'd pushed harder, made him see a doctor, but love can make you blind to the warning signs. Our neighborhood in Capitol Hill didn't help. It was vibrant, alive, with coffee shops and street art, but the traffic was relentless. Drivers sped through crosswalks like they owned the roads, and I'd heard whispers at the local market about a reckless guy in a pickup who'd nearly hit a cyclist. Daniel laughed it off when I worried, saying I'm too stubborn to let some idiot in a truck ruin my day. He'd always been like that. Fearless, almost too trusting in the world's goodness. I clung to that optimism, letting it drown out the unease creeping into my gut. Maybe that's why I didn't see the storm coming, not just for us, but from my own family. My parents, Richard and Margaret, were never the warm, fuzzy type. They ran a slick real estate firm in Bellevue, always chasing the next big deal, their lives a parade of open houses and client dinners. Growing up, I felt like an afterthought next to my sister Ava. She was their golden child, the one who could do no wrong. When I got straight A's, they'd nod and say, "That's expected, Emily." But when Ava dropped out of art school to chase a career in fashion, they threw her a party, calling her bold and visionary. I remember my 16th birthday, when they gave me a sensible sweater while Ava got a designer handbag she'd barely used. It wasn't about the gifts. It was the way their eyes lit up for her, never for me, but soaked it up, always the center of attention. Now a high-profitable fashion editor, she lived in a downtown loft, posting glamorous selfies from industry events. She'd breeze into family gatherings with stories of meeting designers in New York, while my parents hung on her every word. Meanwhile, Daniel and I were scraping by, pouring our savings into Chloe's future and Daniel's community project. My parents sent Chloe birthday cards with crisp $20 bills, but they rarely showed up for her school plays or art shows. "Too busy," they'd say, or "Ava's got an event we can't miss." Daniel would just squeeze my hand and whisper, "We're enough for Chloe, Em." And we were, until we weren't. Daniel tried to bridge the gap with them. He'd invite them to our place for dinner, grilling salmon and playing his classic rock playlist, hoping to win them over. They'd come, but it always felt like a favor. Margaret checking her watch, Richard asking Daniel about his firm's profits instead of his passion for sustainable design. Once, when Chloe was 6, she drew a picture of our family for them, including their names in wobbly crayon. They smiled politely, but left it on our table when they walked out. Daniel taped it to our fridge, saying, "They're lost, kiddo. You're an artist." That was the thing about Daniel. He saw the best in everyone, even when they didn't deserve it. I think he hoped my parents would come around, that they'd see what we'd built together, but deep down, I knew they never would, not until it was too late, and even then, not in the way we needed. That hope Daniel had for my parents, that they'd one day see us as more than a footnote to Ava's shining life, kept us going through the small slights and missed moments. But hope can't stop a speeding truck, and it can't rewrite the kind of loss that splits your life in two. The morning it happened started like any other Tuesday in our Capitol Hill apartment. Daniel was at the stove, flipping blueberry waffles into little house shapes for Chloe, humming Sweet Home Alabama off-key. Giggled, stacking whipped cream towers on her plate while I packed her lunch. Peanut butter sandwich, apple slices, a note saying, "Knock him dead at the art fair, kiddo." Daniel kissed us both goodbye, promising to meet us at Pike Place Market after work to pick out flowers for Chloe's school project. "Don't skimp on the daisies," he teased, ruffling her hair. Those were his last words to me, so ordinary they haunt me now. I was at my desk, managing invoices for an architecture firm downtown, when my phone rang at 11:15. I am Zena Daniel's coworker, her voice trembling so badly I could barely make out the words. "Emily, it's Daniel. He was crossing the street to a job site on Pine Street and a truck hit him. A drunk driver. The ambulance is taking him to Seattle General." My coffee mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the hardwood floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot in my memory. I don't remember grabbing my keys or running to my car. I just remember the drive, weaving through Seattle's traffic, my hands shaking on the wheel as I whispered desperate prayers. "Please, let him be okay. Please." The city blurred past rain-slicked streets, the Space Needle looming in the distance, but all I could see was Daniel's smile, his hazel eyes crinkling at the corners. At Seattle General, the emergency room was a chaos of beeping monitors and hushed voices. A nurse led me to a curtained bay, and there he was, Daniel lying still, his hands calloused from drafting, his face peaceful but wrong, too still. The doctor's words cut through the fog. Massive internal trauma, pronounced dead at 11:52 a.m. I was too late. Minutes too late. I touched his face, still warm, expecting him to wake up, to laugh and say, "Got you, Em," but his chest didn't rise and the silence was louder than anything I'd ever known. I stood there, frozen, as nurses moved around me, their pitying glances like needles. Paperwork followed, forms for the coroner, questions about organ donation I couldn't process. All I could think was how I'd tell Chloe her daddy, her waffle-making, sketch-sharing daddy, was gone forever. Driving home to pick her up from school felt like moving through quicksand. Chloe climbed into the car, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her face bright with stories about her art fair. "Mom, where's Daddy? He said he'd come see my painting." Her voice, so full of trust, broke something inside me. I pulled over on a quiet street, the Seattle rain tapping the windshield like a heartbeat. Taking her small hands in mine, I forced the words out. "Chloe, something terrible happened. Daddy was in an accident today. A truck hit him, and..." His heart stopped. "The doctors couldn't fix it. He's gone." Her hazel eyes, so like Daniel's, searched mine, confused. "But he promised," she whispered. Then she asked, "Does that mean Daddy's never coming home?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak, and she collapsed into my arms, her sobs shaking her tiny frame. "I want Daddy," she wailed, and I held her, crying with her, as cars passed by, oblivious to our shattered world. That night, after Chloe fell asleep clutching Daniel's jacket, I sat on the bathroom floor, door locked so she wouldn't hear me break. The grief was physical, a fist in my chest, stealing my breath. I needed my parents, needed someone to tell me how to survive this. With shaking hands, I dialed their number, hoping they'd know what to do, hoping they'd come running like Daniel's parents had promised to. But when my mom answered, I heard laughter and clinking glasses in the background, the sound of Ava's Gala in full swing. "Emily, we're in the middle of something," she said, her voice sharp. "Can this wait?" I choked out the truth. "Daniel's dead, Mom, a drunk driver, he's gone." And I waited, expecting her to cry, to say they were on their way. Instead, there was a pause, a muffled whisper as she covered the phone. Then she said, "Oh, honey, that's awful. Are you sure? We'll come by tomorrow when the party's over. Ava's worked so hard for this." I hung up, the phone slipping from my hand, my heart breaking all over again. That phone call to my parents felt like a second death, their dismissal cutting deeper than I thought possible. I sat there in the dark, the Seattle rain drumming against the windows, wondering how the people who raised me could prioritize Ava's Gala over our grief. Chloe slept fitfully in my bed, Daniel's jacket still clutched in her small hands, and I realized we were truly alone. The next few days blurred into a haze of funeral plans and paperwork, each task a reminder of what we'd lost. I chose a simple cremation, knowing Daniel would have hated anything flashy, and picked his favorite navy suit for the memorial, the one he wore when we danced at our wedding. Friends rallied around us. Our neighbor Sarah brought casseroles. Mia from Daniel's firm helped with calls, but my family's absence was a gaping wound. Daniel's parents, Tom and Susan, flew in from Portland the moment they heard, their faces etched with a grief that mirrored ours. His sister Lauren caught a red-eye from Denver, arriving with red-rimmed eyes and a bag of Chloe's favorite art supplies to keep her busy. They sat with us, sharing stories of Daniel's childhood, how he'd build forts from cardboard boxes, dreaming of being an architect even then. Tom took over the logistics, coordinating with the funeral home, while Susan held Chloe's hand, whispering that her daddy was watching from the stars. Their love was a lifeline, steady and real. Everything I'd hoped my own parents would offer. The funeral was set for a rainy Saturday at a small chapel near Lake Washington. Chloe insisted on wearing her purple dress, the one Daniel said made her look like an artist. "Daddy loved purple," she said, her voice small but certain. I braided her hair the way he used to, my fingers trembling as I tried to hold it together for her. Daniel's colleagues filled the pews, their dark suits a stark contrast to the bright flowers Chloe had chosen for the altar. They shared quiet stories with her, like how Daniel once stayed up all night to perfect a community center design, earning their respect. It was the kind of support I needed, But my parents and Ava were nowhere to be found until the service was about to start. They slipped in 10 minutes late, making a small commotion as they took the front row seats I'd reserved. My mother, Margaret, gave me a quick hug, her perfume sharp and overwhelming. Traffic was a namer, she muttered, as if Seattle's roads excused their delay. Ava, in a sleek black dress more suited for a fashion event, was already scrolling through her phone, her face lit by the screen. My father, Richard, adjusted his tie, looking impatient like he had somewhere better to be. During the service, I caught Margaret dabbing at dry eyes, a performance for the crowd, while Richard checked his watch. Ava barely looked up, her thumbs tapping out messages as I delivered the eulogy. Stood at the podium, my legs like lead, talking about Daniel's kindness, his terrible rock puns, his love for Chloe. I glanced at Chloe, so small in her purple dress, and found the strength to keep going. He put family first, I said, the words bitter as I looked at my parents already gathering their coats. At the reception in our apartment, they barely helped, leaving Daniel's colleagues' wives and my friends to manage the food and guests. Richard pulled me aside near the kitchen, his voice low. Daniel's life insurance, is it substantial? You'll want to check the policy soon. I stared at him, my husband's ashes still warm in an urn, and felt a rage I didn't know I could hold. He's not even buried yet, I whispered, my voice shaking. He shrugged, saying, just being practical, Emily. You'll thank me later. Avner was no better. She spent the reception in a corner, complaining to my Aunt Clara about missing a magazine deadline for this. Margaret hovered near her, accepting condolences like she was the one who'd lost everything. Meanwhile, Lauren sat with Chloe, helping her draw a picture of Daniel to keep his memory closed. Tom and Susan stayed until the last guest left, washing dishes in silence while I tucked Chloe into bed. Their quiet support was a stark contrast to my family's detachment, a reminder of what families should be. As I lay awake that night, Chloe's soft breathing beside me, I felt the weight of their betrayal settle in. My parents hadn't just failed me, they'd failed Chloe too, and I knew, even then, that this was only the beginning of their audacity. The sting of my parents' betrayal at Daniel's funeral lingered like the Seattle rain, constant and cold. I kept expecting them to call, to show up with apologies or even a flicker of the support they'd promised, but the days passed in silence. Chloe and I moved through our grief like ghosts, trying to piece together a life without Daniel. Lauren stayed for a week, teaching Chloe to draw stars while Tom and Susan sent daily texts, checking on us from port. My friends, like Mia and Sarah, filled our fridge with meals, their quiet kindness a reminder that we weren't entirely alone. But my family, Richard, Margaret, and Ava, seemed to vanish into their world of Bellevue mansions and fashion galas, as if Daniel's death was just a minor inconvenience. I should have known they weren't done with us yet, that their absence was only the calm before a storm I never saw coming. 2 weeks after the funeral, I was sorting through Daniel's desk, trying to make sense of our finances, when the doorbell rang. Chloe was at school, her first day back, and I was alone, surrounded by his sketches and unpaid bills. Through the peephole, I saw my parents standing on the porch, Richard in a crisp golf shirt, Margaret touching up her lipsticks about thinking of you. I opened the door, forcing a neutral tone. I didn't know you were coming. Margaret brushed past me, her heels clicking on the hardwood. We thought we'd check in, see how you're holding up, she said, her voice too bright. Richard nodded, scanning our small apartment like he was appraising it. Is Chloe at school? Good. We can talk freely. That should have been my first clue, but grief had dulled my instincts. I made coffee, falling into the role of hostess even though they should have been the ones comforting me. As I set the mugs down, Richard was admiring Daniel's new sound system, a spurge from his last bonus. Nice setup, he said, running a hand along the speakers. Daniel had taste. I nodded, the past tense like a knife. After awkward small talk about Chloe's school and Margaret's charity luncheons, Richard cleared his throat, a habit from my childhood when he was about to lecture. Emily, we need to discuss your situation, he began, setting his mug down with precision. Your financial situation now that Daniel's gone. I blinked, not following. What do you mean? Daniel left us provided for. Margaret exchanged a glance with Richard, her smile tight. That's what we're here to talk about, she said. Your father and I aren't getting any younger. Our retirement fund took a hit last year and medical costs are rising. The implication hung in the air, heavy and surreal. Are you asking me for money? I said, my voice flat. Margaret looked briefly embarrassed, but Richard leaned forward, unfazed. We thought given Daniel's success and his life insurance, you'd be in a position to help family. It's only fair. The audacity stole my breath. Daniel's ashes were still in our living room, Chloe was barely sleeping, and they were here with their hands out. How much? I asked, not because I was considering it, but because I needed to hear the number. Richard brightened, missing the ice in my tone. We're thinking 60% of the life insurance payout. It'll secure our retirement and leave plenty for you and Chloe. Plus, a small 10% for Ava. She's struggling with her. Stared at them, the math sinking in. They wanted 70% of the $1,200,000. 0 cents meant for Chloe's future, for her college, her dreams. You want to take from your granddaughter's security? I said, my voice rising. The daughter you couldn't comfort because you were at Ava's gala. Margaret flinched, but Richard waved it off. Now, Emily, don't be emotional. We came to the funeral. We've supported you your whole life, college, your first apartment. This is practical family planning. Practical, as if grief followed spreadsheets. I thought of Daniel's warnings, late-night talks when he'd mentioned Richard asking for investment opportunities that sounded like loans. He'd always declined, protecting us, but I hadn't realized how deep their greed ran. Get out, I said quietly, my hands shaking. Margaret started to protest, but I cut her off. Out. Now. They left, muttering about my ingratitude, but the real blow was yet to come. A week later, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Richard, his tone formal, like he was closing a real estate deal. Emily, we need a family meeting at our house in Bellevue, Sunday at 2:00. Bring Chloe. This concerns everyone. I played it twice, the nerve of involving Chloe making my blood boil, but something in me knew this wasn't over. Never. I called Lauren, who was back in Denver, and she was livid. They're vultures, she said. Daniel would have lost it. She was right, but I felt a strange resolve. If they wanted a fight, I'd face them, for Chloe, for Daniel. Sunday was coming, and I had no idea what Chloe was planning, clutching that manila envelope she wouldn't let me see. The drive to my parents' Bellevue mansion that Sunday felt like heading into a storm. Chloe sat beside me, unusually quiet, her manila envelope clutched tight against her purple sweater. I'd asked her what was inside, but she only said, "It's for Daddy, Mom. You'll see." Her determination, so like Daniel's when he faced a tough client, both worried and steadied me. Seattle's skyline faded behind us as we crossed Lake Washington, the rain giving way to a rare glimpse of sun. I wanted to believe my parents might surprise me, that they'd apologize for their greed and show up for Chloe the way grandparents should. But deep down, I knew better. Richard's voicemail had been too calculated, and the cars parked in their driveway, my Aunt Clara's sedan, Uncle David's SUV, told me this wasn't a family meeting. It was an ambush. We walked through the polished oak doors of their sprawling home, the same place I'd grown up feeling like a guest. Margaret greeted us with a practiced smile, her dress more suited for a boardroom than a family gathering. "Emily, Chloe, come in. Everyone's in the living room." The familiar hallway, lined with photos of Ava's achievements, felt suffocating. In the living room, Richard sat in his leather recliner like a king on a throne. Ava perched on the sofa's arm, scrolling through her phone. Aunt Clara and Uncle David sat stiffly, their faces unreadable, while my cousin Lisa hovered near the window, avoiding my eyes. The air was thick with expectation, and I kept Chloe close, her small hand warm in mine. "Thank you for coming," Richard said, his voice clipped, like he was addressing a client. "We have serious matters to discuss." I stayed standing, Chloe beside me, and cut to the chase. "If this is about the insurance money, you can say it in front of Chloe. She deserves to know what's happening." Margaret frowned, her lips pursing. "Emily, this isn't appropriate for a child." I held her gaze. "If it's not appropriate for her to hear, it's not appropriate for you to ask. This is about her future." Richard cleared his throat, undeterred. "Fine, let's be direct. Your mother and I have supported you your entire life. College tuition, your first apartment. Given the substantial windfall from Daniel's passing, it's only fair you help the family." He slid a printed document across the coffee table, a spreadsheet detailing their demands. 60% of the $1,200,000, 0 cents life insurance for their retirement, 10% for Ava's business ventures. Ava glanced up, her smile smug, as if Daniel's death was her lottery win. You want 70% of the money meant for Chloe's future? I said, my voice steady despite the rage boiling inside. Money Daniel earned for us? Margaret leaned forward, her tone patronizing. Family takes care of family, Emily. We're not asking for everything. You'll still have plenty. I laughed, bitter and sharp. Plenty? You mean what's left after you fund your cruises and Ava's next photo shoot? You chose Ava's gala over my grief. That's your family. The room tensed, Clara shifting uncomfortably, David staring at his shoes. Richard stood, his face reddening. We apologized for the timing, but Ava's event was planned months in advance. Be reasonable. Ava cut in, her voice dripping with disdain. You're acting like we're stealing, Emily. Mom and Dad deserve security and I'm barely getting by in fashion. You've got more than you need. I turned to her, my voice rising. Daniel died, Ava. Chloe lost her father. You think he worked himself to death so you could buy a new handbag? The silence was heavy, broken only by Lisa's soft gasp. Then Chloe stepped forward, her envelope trembling in her hands. I have something to say, she announced, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the tension like a blade. Margaret tried a condescending smile. Sweetie, the adults are talking. Chloe didn't flinch, her hazel eyes fixed on them. This is about Daddy and it's important. Every head turned to her, this 9-year-old standing tall in a room of adults. Even Ava put down her phone. Daddy taught me that when people show you who they are, you believe them, Chloe said, her voice steady. And when they only show up for money, they're not real family. She faced Richard and Margaret directly. You didn't come when Daddy died. You didn't help Mom when she cried every night. You didn't ask if I was okay. She opened her envelope and pulled out a sheet of paper, designed like an invoice in her careful handwriting. I made this for you, because that's why you're here. She handed it to Richard, who took it, his hands unsteady. I glimpsed it over his shoulder. Bill for real family love, it listed. Being there when Daddy died, $0, 0 cents, not done. Helping Mom when she was sad, $0, 0 cents, not done. Loving me like real grandparents, priceless not paid. The total was $0, 0 cents. The room went still, the air sucked out. Richard's face froze, the paper shaking in his hands. Margaret's eyes welled up, her composure crumbling. Ava stared at Chloe, her smugness gone. Clara whispered, "Oh God," her hand over her mouth. Chloe's voice didn't waver. "That's what you earned." I took her hand, pride and sorrow swelling in my chest. "We're done here," I said quietly. "Don't contact us unless you can be the family Chloe deserves." We walked out, leaving them stunned, the weight of Chloe's truth heavier than any argument I could have made. In the car, I hugged her tight. "You were so brave, baby." She nodded, her eyes shining. "Daddy would have wanted me to stand up, right?" "Absolutely," I said, tears falling. As we drove back to Seattle, I felt a strange freedom, like we'd shed a burden we'd carried too long. Driving away from my parents' Bellevue mansion, Chloe's manila envelope still tucked under her arm, I felt a shift, like the Seattle sky clearing after weeks of rain. Her bravery, that invoice spelling out the truth in her careful handwriting, had changed everything. We weren't just leaving behind Richard, Margaret, and Ava's greed. We were stepping into a future. We'd define ourselves. Daddy would be proud, right, Mom? I squeezed her hand, tears blurring the road. "So proud, baby. You showed them what mattered." Back in our Capitol Hill apartment, the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was ours, filled with Daniel's memory and our strength. But I knew the fallout wasn't over. My parents weren't the type to let go easily, and I braced for what might come next. The days that followed were a mix of healing and defiance. Lauren called from Denver, floored by Chloe's courage. "That's pure damnal," she said, laughing through tears. "Creative and fearless." Tom and Susan sent a care package from Portland. Chloe's favorite sketch pads and a note saying, "You're our hero." Mia and Sarah kept our fridge stocked, their visits a reminder that family isn't always blood, but my parents tried to claw their way back. Richard sent texts demanding we reconsider our stance, while Margaret left voicemails dripping with guilt. "We raised you, Emily. This isn't how family behaves." Ava's messages were nastier, accusing me of hoarding Daniel's money out of spite. I ignored them, but their persistence gnawed at me, a reminder of the fight ahead. Then I found Daniel's letter, tucked in a folder of financial papers. His handwriting, steady and familiar, dated 3 months before his death, stopped me cold. "My dearest M," it began. "If you're reading this, something's gone wrong. I didn't want to scare you, but I've been feeling off. Tired, stressed. I've updated our will and insurance to protect you and Chloe." He detailed the $1,200,000 0 cents policy, all for us, with a trust for Chloe's education, untouchable until she's 25. But one paragraph hit like a punch. "Your dad's asked me twice for investments, thinly veiled grabs for cash. I said no, but he thinks my death will open the door through you. Don't let him. Chloe's future comes first." Daniel had seen their greed coming, shielding us even as he faced his own fears. I cried, angry he'd kept his health worries secret, but grateful for his foresight. I called Nathan, our lawyer and Daniel's old friend, who confirmed the estate was airtight. "They have no claim," he said, reviewing the documents. "The trust is ironclad, and contesting the will would be a losing battle." He suggested keeping Daniel's letter handy, not for legal reasons, but to remind my parents of Daniel's wishes if they pushed further. Richard did try, sending a formal letter on his real estate firm's letterhead, threatening to reassess our if I didn't share the insurance. It was meant to intimidate, but it felt like permission to let go. I filed it, with Nathan, just in case, and focused on rebuilding our life. Chloe and I leaned into the people who showed up. Lauren flew back for a weekend, teaching Chloe chess, a game Daniel had planned to share with her. Susan baked his favorite oatmeal cookies with Chloe, their laughter filling our kitchen. Mia organized a college fund for Chloe with Daniel's colleagues separate from the trust, a gesture that left me speechless. I found purpose starting a nonprofit in Daniel's name, funding eco-friendly community spaces like the ones he'd designed. It wasn't just about honoring him. It gave me a reason to get up each morning, a way to carry his dreams forward. Chloe thrived too, her art teacher sending me notes about her resilience, though she still had nights when she'd cry for her daddy, curling up with his jacket. 3 months after the confrontation, a plain envelope arrived, no letterhead, just my parents' handwriting. "Dear Emily and Chloe," it read. "We've spent weeks reflecting on our actions, the pain we caused when you needed us most. There's no excuse for our greed or absence. We failed you, and we failed Daniel's memory." They acknowledged specific wrongs, missing the funeral, demanding money, favoring Ava, and said they'd started therapy to understand their mistakes. They didn't ask for forgiveness, only a chance to prove themselves, maybe with a short visit to see Chloe. I read it multiple times, searching for manipulation, then showed it to Lauren. "It feels real," she said cautiously, "but trust your gut." I talked to Chloe, who was open but wary. "If they're really sorry, maybe we can try," she said, sketching a star as she spoke. We met them at her favorite ice cream shop in Fremont, a neutral spot. It was awkward. Margaret's hands fidgeted, Richard's usual swagger gone, but they focused on Chloe, asking about her art, listening without pushing. They didn't mention money or the past, a small sign of change. As we left, Richard asked quietly, "Could we see her again, maybe next month?" The humility in his voice made me pause. "We'll see," I said. "It depends on you." Ava took longer. Her initial reaction was venomous, posting vague social media rants about selfish sisters. But 6 months later, she emailed me, raw and honest. "I've been jealous of you forever," she wrote. "Your life with Daniel, your strength. It made me feel small. I was wrong to side with Mom and Dad. It wasn't a full fix, but it cracked open a door we'd both kept locked." Aunt Clara became an unexpected ally, calling to apologize for the meeting, admitting she'd been misled about its purpose. She confirmed what I'd always felt. My parents' favoritism toward Ava was no secret, and she regretted staying silent. On Daniel's birthday, we held a memorial barbecue in our backyard, with his favorite classic rock playlist and barbecue ribs. Friends shared stories, Daniel's terrible puns, his late-night design marathons. Chloe presented a scrapbook of his sketches, her small hands tracing his lines. My parents weren't invited, a boundary I needed, but Chloe tugged my sleeve as the sun set. "Mom, if Grandma and Grandpa keep trying, can we invite them next time?" Her compassion, so like Daniel's, broke me open. If they show they've changed, I promised. Maybe next time. Year later, at Gasworks Park, Chloe and I sat by Lake Union, skipping stones the way Daniel taught her. Mom, she said, thoughtful. I think my invoice helped them see themselves. I smiled, amazed by her wisdom. Daddy said people need to see clearly to change. I pulled her close. He'd be so proud of us, baby. Losing Daniel showed me who family really is. Lauren, Tom, Susan, Mia. Not just blood, but love that shows up. If you've ever had to redraw the lines of family, share your story below. Like and subscribe if this resonated. And remember, protecting yourself isn't selfish. It's how you honor the ones you love.